We subscribe to an approach called community-based design, which says this is not a top-down process. There's no one who is coming to impose this on you, but this is also not fully a grassroots process. And so we're trying to say, what's the best of both worlds?
This is the Education Crisis, what it is and how to fix it. I'm your host, Tembi Duncan. This series features renowned education expert, Dr. Charles Reigeluth, author of the book, Vision and Action, Reinventing Schools Through Personalized, Competency-Based Education. Together, we examine the crisis in American education. What has caused the crisis? What our schools need to be like to fix the crisis? How to successfully transform to that very different kind of school, and what you can do to help your schools to transform. Chapter 8. How can a school district transform to a learner-centered culture? Dr. Reigeluth, previously in this series, you explained the importance of changing the roles, content, and culture of schools to enable learning-based student progress. You even talked about how schools' organizational structure should evolve towards several small, teacher-led schools. Now, this gives us a pretty good vision of a school system that better meets everyone's needs. Now, given all of those ideas, a big question that remains is how can schools go about making the transformation to this new paradigm of education? What would that process look like? It seems like it would be complicated to pull off.
Yes, the transformation is very difficult. It is far more difficult than piecemeal reforms that educators are so familiar with. Fortunately, we have learned a lot about the transformation process over the past 15 years, and there's a growing number of nonprofit organizations that are helping school districts to undergo this transformation successfully.
Well, that's encouraging. I will talk with some of those trailblazers later in this chapter, but first, what advice would you give to schools that want to transform to the new paradigm, but they don't know where to begin?
Well, first, I have to caution that a single classroom or a single grade level and even a single school in a school district is not likely to succeed. And if they do manage to transform, it will be short-lived because it will be incompatible with the rest of the school system, and hidden forces will work to transform it back. The unit of change has to be the school district, unless the school is not part of a district or other larger organization. A standalone school, such as a private school or a public charter school that's not controlled by a larger organization, is the easiest scenario for successful transformation. But several entire school districts have transformed successfully. One of the earliest was the Chugach School District in Alaska. More recently, the Lindsay Unified School District in California and the Winooski School District in Vermont have made impressive strides. In this chapter, I'll offer guidance for a school district to transform itself. In the next chapter, 9, I'll offer guidance for an individual school to transform itself. Now, there are 3 major kinds of guidance that have proven to be helpful for transformation on both the district level and the school level. One is guiding principles that enhance success. A second is sequential activities, in essence phases or steps, things that should be done in a certain order. The third is continuous activities, things that need to be addressed throughout most of the transformation process. All 3 kinds of guidance are very helpful and based on experience.
Great. Let's start with those guiding principles.
Okay. Perhaps the most important principle relates to mindsets or mental models about education and about the change process. The learner-centered paradigm of education is a different mindset or mental model of education. Stakeholders must explore and develop a new mental model for them to be able to design their new educational system, but also to be able to operate effectively within it. This is why mandating the change from above cannot succeed, why the change process has to be homegrown and needs to be both bottom-up and top-down. Now, this leads to the second principle, stakeholder involvement and ownership of the transformation process and the vision. You need a critical mass of people to transform the system, and stakeholders who are not involved in the process will not develop new mindsets about education and will resist or even undermine the transformation. And this leads to the principle to make the transformation process a learning process, not a voting process. Learning occurs through consensus building. sharing one's thoughts and evaluating them against one's values, rather than voting, which creates winners and losers because the losers would undermine the process. This points to another principle. It's very important for stakeholders to reach consensus on values about education first. Then they can use those values as a litmus test for all their design decisions.
Interesting. What are some more principles?
Well, another is the importance of transformational leadership, sometimes called servant leadership or participatory leadership or developmental leadership. The top-down command and control paradigm of leadership is counterproductive to transformation. Transformational leadership entails building a shared vision and then empowering everyone to take initiative and be creative in pursuit of that vision, communicate with and support each other, and not be punished if an action doesn't work out as hoped. Other principles relate to securing political support, building the right kind of culture for the transformation effort, designing for the ideal and compromising later as necessary, using the systems concepts of emergence and leverage, and building readiness for transformation. You can learn more about all these principles in my book, Vision and Action.
Those are some powerful principles to guide the transformation process. It's interesting how much emphasis you place on shifting mindsets, providing space for all the stakeholders to contribute to the process, and creating a culture of learning and multifaceted collaboration. Now, should we talk about the specific steps that schools need to take to start to make these changes?
Okay. The first step in the transformation process is to prepare for the process. This is an issue of readiness. For a school district to transform itself successfully, several readiness criteria need to be met. And if they're not met, the district needs to engage in activities to meet them before undertaking the transformation.
Now that makes a lot of sense. What are some of those criteria?
Well, most of the criteria have to do with the culture of the district. There must not be strained relationships among stakeholder groups, the school board, administrators, teachers, other staff, parents, and even students. It's important to have some degree of trust among the leaders of the various stakeholder groups. Trust would be insufficient if there was recently a bitter teacher strike, or a parent group is upset over something, or the school board's micromanaging the administrators, to name a few. Another criterion is resources. Transformation requires changes in stakeholders' conceptions of education, which is tied to mindsets and values. These personal changes in mindsets take time, and educators and parents tend to not have much time to spare. So it helps a lot if you can buy some of their time, perhaps during the summer or other vacations.
That makes sense. I'll bet teachers will be on board for that.
Another criterion is that the school board must be supportive of the transformation, and the superintendent must be enthusiastic about the transformation and must be competent with the transformational style of leadership, as I mentioned earlier. Another criterion is the district's history with change. If stakeholders are exhausted from frequent reform efforts, or if there have recently been some failed reform efforts, the stakeholders will likely have a bad attitude toward participating in the transformation process. These are some of the most important criteria, and I'd like to say they're like a chain, so if there's a weak link, the whole chain breaks.
Interesting. Are there other aspects of preparing for transformation?
Yes, indeed. Aside from building readiness, it's important to hire an experienced facilitator. We recommend that this person be from outside the district because the facilitator must be viewed by all as neutral, no favoritism. This person should not be viewed as a consultant, there to solve the problem for the district. Rather, this person should be competent in helping the stakeholders to solve their own problem, to design their new system. In my book, Vision and Action, we offer criteria for selecting a good facilitator. And over the past 10 or 20 years, many nonprofit groups have arisen to provide competent facilitation. We identify some of them in this book. And there's a third very important activity to prepare for the transformation. Form a pre-launch team. And this ties in with building readiness. The team is made up of an influential leader from each stakeholder group, a school board member, superintendent, principal, teacher, and parent. The purpose of this team is to develop a team culture and capacity for transformation. so that when this team expands to become the leadership team, which is typically about 20 to 30 influential people from all stakeholder groups, it can preserve that culture and build the capacity of the leadership team. The prelaunch team can also improve district readiness, conduct a political and community analysis, develop school board culture and understanding of transformation, secure external and internal funding, and select an assistant superintendent for transformation, among other things.
I can see that preparation is very important to a successful transformation. Once the preparation has been done, though, what comes after that?
When the leadership team is ready, it's tasked with creating a shared vision of what they think would make an ideal school system. It's very important to start by thinking in the ideal, a principle I mentioned earlier, and later compromise on the ideal as necessary to implement it, but continue to evolve closer to that ideal over time. Thinking in the ideal is difficult for educators because they tend to be very practical people. So the leadership team starts by reaching consensus on the values that the system should reflect, and as it makes design decisions, it constantly reviews how well the decisions align with the values. This idealized design process is a consensus building process and a learning process. It doesn't operate by majority rule because that creates winners and losers, which can result in losers sabotaging the effort. The learning process helps team members to evolve their mental models or mindsets about education, but it's important for the leadership team to share what they're learning with members of their stakeholder group who are not on the leadership team to build broad understanding and support for the new design. Community conferences are also helpful to build broader ownership of the vision. Once the vision's been endorsed by the entire school community, individual schools are invited to apply to begin tailoring and implementing the vision to their school. The leadership team procures funding and other resources to support the selected school's transformation. It's important not to select more schools than there are sufficient resources to support. One strategy here is to start with elementary schools and expand to each higher grade level as the students move up. This is done in what's called a feeder system in larger school districts. Another strategy is to start with a school that has more than 20 teachers and ask about 10 teachers to volunteer to create a separate school within the building that would be administratively independent from the traditional school in the building, but with the agreement that those volunteers are trailblazers for all the other teachers to follow after many of the resources and practices are developed and the inevitable problems are solved. This avoids creating an us versus them attitude of competition between the two schools in the building. Whatever strategy is chosen by the leadership team, it's essential to create a separate administrative structure along the lines of what we discussed in the previous chapter, Chapter 7. This means a separate district-level administrative structure as well as a different school-level structure.
This seems like a very well-thought-out process.
Well, it's been forged by experience, based on what's worked well in the past.
Okay, and how well has the implementation gone?
Well, it's challenging. It helps a lot when the teachers have been able to visit and study a school that's made changes similar to what they're designing. It also helps if they hire an organization that has experience helping other schools to transform. But difficulties and problems always arise, and the teachers need to adapt their vision and their change process to address them, and also to evolve their vision as they learn more. Transformation never ceases to be a learning process for all involved. Once some of the major problems have been ironed out in the first school or two to transform, the leadership team can select more schools to transform, using lessons learned by the initial trailblazers. So the new administrative structure will need to expand and evolve in its role as supporting, not commanding, the new schools. And the leadership team should also evolve their ideal vision for the district as they learn more and circumstances change.
Earlier, you mentioned that there are continuous activities in addition to these sequential activities in the transformation process. Can you talk about some of those continuous activities?
Sure. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of trust among stakeholders participating in the process. You don't just need to build it, but you need to work to maintain it at a high level throughout the transformation process. Building and sustaining motivation is another. Change is hard, and there will be setbacks. Strong motivation is needed for the process to succeed. Communication is also important to continually foster among participants, and it's important to continually reflect on and evaluate both the transformation process and the vision, as well as for each participant to reflect on and evaluate their own thinking and activities. Learning is also important to continually foster. This includes evolving one's mental models, evolving the culture of the transformation process, developing systems thinking and design skills, developing group process and team building skills, encouraging participants to share their personal beliefs, assumptions, and mindsets, building a sense of community, and fostering organizational learning and memory. Other continuous activities include developing and sustaining transformational leadership or developmental leadership skills, and securing necessary resources to support the transformation process.
This guidance sounds so valuable. The guiding principles, the sequential activities, and the continuous activities, they seem to cover all the bases. Now, if I wanted to get my school district to undergo this transformation, what should I do?
Well, that's a topic for a whole new podcast. In fact, that's the topic of our next chapter. But one of my strongest recommendations is to reach out to a nonprofit organization that specializes in helping school districts to transform.
We spoke with leaders from two nonprofit organizations that have helped schools to transform. First, let's hear from Jeff Wetzler, co-founder and board member of Transcend Education, which is a nonprofit organization that operates nationally to help schools and districts to transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education. So what does Transcend Education do to help a school district to transform?
When we think about a school district transforming, we think about both the experiences of young people and the learning outcomes. And so we think about, together with a community, what are the kinds of outcomes that we want to be producing? What do we want our learners to be able to know and do in this fast-changing world? But equally, we say, what are the experiences that young people should be having in school? You know, we have a set of research that we use to inspire communities in their thinking. And the question then becomes, how does a community create those experiences and outcomes? We subscribe to an approach called community-based design. This is not a top-down process. There's no one who is coming to impose this on you. But this is also not fully a grassroots process, because we have seen that when something is completely grassroots, it can overburden people who are already so busy that they don't have time to figure it all out by themselves. Honoring and empowering the experts in any local community, but equipping them with tools and resources and knowledge and expertise to pursue their vision in the ways that they want to.
Do you consider readiness factors when deciding whether to work with a school district? And if so, what are they?
So we have learned over the years that this process requires a set of what we call community conditions in order to work. There are 5 of them. We write about this in our book. They include things like the community needs to be clear on what they want to go after. They have to have a level of conviction about how important this is relative to all the other things. There needs to be a strong coalition, so it's not just one person's idea. They need to have enough of a culture of trust and learning and innovation. And they need to have some capacity to be able to put against this: time, resources, skills, and so on. Those are the 5 conditions. And we rigorously assess those conditions together with communities to say, where are you on each of these conditions? And what we say is that every community is ready to start, no matter what their conditions are. But the speed of their progress will be determined by their conditions. And so many times we will work with communities to design a process for the journey, which is tailored to nurturing the conditions based on the unique profile of their starting point and their ongoing point as well. And so in many ways, the community-based design journey is not just trying to help them develop a better technical model of school, but simultaneously to nurture the human conditions so that that technical model can actually come about and sustain over time. We also believe deeply that one of the biggest drivers of conditions is the leadership in the system. And we don't define leadership specifically as equivalent to hierarchical authority, But we do believe that those who are in positions of hierarchical power have a special role, a special influence over conditions as well. And so we spend a lot of time working with system leaders to develop what we call learner-centered leadership, which is all about how do they grow their own mindsets and skills in order to cultivate these conditions in their system.
In this podcast, we talk about three major kinds of guidance for a school district to transform itself. One of them is guiding principles, another is sequential activities, and a third is continuous activities that have to be addressed throughout the entire process. Does this fit with what you think is helpful to guide the transformation process?
Yes, those all deeply resonate. The single most important guiding principle is putting the learner at the center. Always what is best for learners. And doing that requires looking at that from a few different angles. One is, what does learning science say? Because there is a science to learning and development, but also the science of motivation, how people actually, get motivated to stick with things and put in the effort, the science of identity, the science of individual variability. So all of that is part of putting the learner at the center, is knowing that science. But also putting the learner at the center is listening to learners and ensuring they have a seat at the table, because we believe they may not be experts in the science of learning and development, but they are experts in their own experience. And so if ultimately we're trying to design better experiences, we need to talk to the experts, not just to consult to them, but ideally, let them be decision makers as well. And so that's a second dimension of putting the learner at the center. And then a third, I would say, is looking at the world that the learners are going to inherit, and the trends and what's changing in that world, and what those trends imply for the changing demands on learners as well. I would say those are all sub-principles within the ultimate principle of learner is at the center.
How important is it to change people's mindsets about education in order to begin the transformation process?
Deeply important. I think that mindsets, the typical mindsets in school systems historically have not put the learner at the center. They have put the system at the center, and they've asked learners to conform to the system. Putting the learner at the center is a massive mindset shift in its own right. There's other mindset shifts related to who do we believe can learn? Who do we believe deserves to learn? What expectations do we have for whom? And trying to understand how have we as a culture been socialized around assumptions on those questions, and what does it mean to unlearn those? There's mindset shifts related to even how does school function in the first place? Because we have, almost all gone through an industrial model of education and have deeply baked assumptions about what is a teacher and what is a student and what is a classroom and what does orderly mean and what does effective look like, and all of those different archetypes, all of which we need to re-examine as part of mindset shifts.
So do you view the transformation process as a design process and a consensus building process, or how would you characterize it?
We bring a couple of lenses to it. One is the design lens. And we believe that if the factory model of school was designed one way, we can design something different. And so we try to be very rigorous about what are all the contributing factors that go into a learner's experience. How is time used? How is space used? What is the curriculum? What are the roles of different people in it? How is budget used? Those are all design choices. So human-centered design is the modality of design that we bring to the equation. But we also consider this a human participatory process. And sometimes the design lens does not encompass all of those dimensions as well, because you could have the most perfect design of school, but if you don't have people in the system who are excited about that design, or who know how to execute it, or who are ready to execute it, the design doesn't matter. We are constantly holding the design, the technical design, and the human conditions as equally important. And so the design lens helps us with the design, and kind of participatory change leadership concepts help us with the human conditions.
Do you find that the community needs to reach consensus on values about education before they can reach consensus on the features that their educational system should have?
Yes. We start with questions of mission and purpose, and questions of design principles, which I think intersect with values. And, the question of consensus is an interesting question because it can take a long time to get to full consensus. And so we prefer commitment over consensus. And people might say, I would have worded it differently or this, but I feel like I've been heard. I feel like my voice has contributed to it. And so I can commit to this.
What do you think are some of the most important sequential activities? So if you think of the transformation process from beginning to end, what would you say are the various phases?
And we roughly lay this out in our book as well. But we have an early step that we call lay the foundation. And this is a step that is basically saying, let's understand where the conditions are right now in the system. Let's get a little bit of clarity around what are we trying to do here? What, are we trying to redesign a whole school? Are we trying to redesign an experience? What are the general features that we are trying to go after? So there's a set of foundational elements that we think need to be in place before anything else goes on. Then there's a set of steps related to kind of zooming out and saying, let's look at the full picture of a learning environment. How is it designed today? How are people experiencing it today? Let's understand where's the future going. Let's dive into learning science. Let's look at other models to take inspiration. And let's start to sketch out what is our high level aspirations for where we want this learning environment to go, even if it might take years to get there. And then there's a set of cycles that are around saying, all right, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with advisory? Do we want to start with sixth grade? Do we want to start? So you got to kind of take something that you can kind of bite off and start to work through what do we want to envision, what do we want to build, what do we test there, and continue to pilot our way into that. I'm always keeping the high level vision in mind.
What would you say are some of the most important continuous activities, those things that you have to pay attention to throughout the process? I mean, do you find that it's important to continuously work on things like trust and motivation, communication, things like self-evaluation?
Yes. There's a strand that runs through our whole process that we call tending to process and leadership. And I think that is, that speaks to a lot of what you were just talking about. Are people trusting each other? What are the conditions? What is the culture going on? How is this being led?
Can one school and a district make a transformation while the rest of the district remains the same?
Yes, we have seen that is possible, but it requires a level of protection and permission for the school to do that, because oftentimes they're making choices that are different than what the district is mandating or asking of other schools as well. Some districts view that as the best way to go forward because they are thinking, we can't change everything all at once. We got a lot that's working. We got a lot on our plate. So let's carve off a school and give them some permission. Sometimes that's a full school. Sometimes that's a micro school. And let's let them show the rest of the district what's possible in that environment. Other districts say, no. If something needs to change somewhere, it needs to change for all our kids. So we're marching down this road together. We don't have a judgment on which is the best of those pathways. We've seen that it can work in both scenarios.
I've seen situations where a school makes wonderful changes, but those changes make it incompatible with the rest of the district. So then powerful hidden forces work to transform it back to what it was. Have you ever encountered that problem in your work?
Definitely. If a school is doing one thing and the district is at odds with that, there will be a gravitational pullback. And that's why we will never work with a school absent also having engagement at the central office level. And so this idea that a single school can do it rests on the idea that there are certain leadership moves happening at the district that will prevent what you just said from happening.
How important is it for a district to hire an experienced facilitator, such as Transcend?
We are agnostic as to whether you would use an outside partner like Transcend or do it yourself. But the reason why we founded the organization is that we have found that it's hard enough to operate school, let alone make time and space to actually rethink differently. And so we've talked with many superintendents and principals and others who've said, I really want to do what you're talking about, but where and how am I going to do that if I'm just trying to put out all the fires every day? And so it can be helpful to have a partner to guide you through the process, to help you prioritize it, to help bring that kind of expertise. And at Transcend, we are trying to be that partner, but we're also trying to help systems build their own local capacity, whether that's people inside their own systems or local organizations, et cetera. So we would prefer, honestly, that it not be us, because we can't reach everybody that we think needs to go through this, which is why we're also really investing in capacity building as well.
Thank you, Jeff, for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation. You offered us a clear picture of what it takes for a district to move toward a learner-centered paradigm, from the conditions that make transformation possible to the balance between design expertise and genuine community ownership. Now let's move on to Scott Fronheim at Leap Innovations, a Chicago-based nonprofit that helps schools and districts transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education. Scott, what does Leap Innovations do to help a school district to transform?
Yeah, so we're really intentional about beginning with district leadership and thinking about system level transformation and change. And so some of the indicators for that are us checking in on buy-in, excitement, vision, aligned strategic vision from the leadership of the district, and making sure that they're ready to really take on what system level transformation or district transformation can and should look like. We check for culture readiness, the relationships and the trust that are built at the district level. We look a little bit backwards at some of the data and some of the informed approaches or pathways that have led them to their own degree of readiness or their own belief of readiness. And then we take them through our convergence framework, really intentional road mapping to check for readiness. And so we look at culture, we look at financial investments, we look at staffing and turnover, we look at student achievement data. We also are really thinking about defining a culture together with them on systems transformation. And so helping them to identify their readiness to truly let people in and let people bring their perspective and let people bring their voice and be ready to take ideas and maybe have to do something with them.
So, beginning with district leadership, developing their readiness through culture, relationships, and trust, and looking at such things as financial investments, staffing, and student data. Could you say more about readiness factors when you're deciding whether to work with a school district?
Readiness to elevate learner, parent, educator, stakeholder voices in the process. Other readiness factors are a culture of innovation created and iterative change created. Other readiness factors around labor force readiness and being intentional about the key partnerships and strategic partnerships that need to be aligned to some of what the change or the proposed change is.
How much do you try to tell a district what changes to make, as opposed to helping them decide?
The key goal is to have a district understand what their needs are and what change that they are ready to make with our informed supports, right? So we're helping them look at their data, we're helping them look at their readiness, we're helping them look at where they want to go. We want the end goal to be something that is co-created and co-designed alongside a district, but we want it to be informed by the data and the needs and the voices of that district. And so there's times where we're in the process of co-design and the district is misaligned a little bit in our perspective from where their community or where their data or where their stakeholders are pushing them. And so we do step back and we take them through some of that data to help them understand where they might be misaligned or ready.
Okay, so co-design is key. You don't tell them what changes to make. You help them make good decisions based on the needs and readiness of the district and the community. So can one school in a district transform while the rest of the district stays the same?
So we believe that piloting is a critical component. I've been a part of lots of small pilots. I also believe we can learn a lot through piloting and looking at some of the data sets and some of the use cases and some of the evidence-based and research-based supports. And so if we're going to do pilots or we're going to let one school be trailblazers or be early adopters, we have to think about how we're scaling the transformation elsewhere. Otherwise, I don't believe it's a real strong return on investment for that district or a strategic investment for that district to just be doing pockets of innovation without scale for the sake of just innovating. And so we push our districts to think about benchmarks and true convergence timelines with milestones for what are we learning from those pilots? And then how do we create the sideline effect where people are getting excited about what they went to see or what that school or district has adopted in a pilot to be able to think about what the expectation and the success criteria is for scale across the system.
So change in one school inside of a district is always a precursor to scaling up in other schools in the district. Earlier in this podcast, we talked about three major kinds of guidance for the district transformation process: guiding principles, sequential activities, and continuous activities. Does this fit with what you think is helpful to guide the transformation process?
1,000%. And while we may have different terms for them, our convergence framework leads us through those exact indicators. Obviously, we look at stages, we set those milestones, and we co-design them with the district. And so as they're thinking about transformation, we are helping them map those and then thinking about what the activities are that they are going to accomplish along that map. It's so important for folks to see the long-term impact and the long-term success to build that motivation and excitement, but also really important to document what each individual activity is so that others are learning from it.
What are the most important guiding principles?
Yeah, so we look really closely at leadership and leadership readiness and what that means for culture and system mindset and change management. We look at instructional models across the system, and so being really intentional about how change is impacting, student achievement. We look at curriculum and the digital ecosystem of a school system, what the readiness is for that, and then how it can be enhanced. And then we look at the professional learning and the community wrapped around that work. Mindset change is incredibly important, and we talk a lot about that around the readiness factors with district leadership. And we find that district leadership needs to be ready to lead the mindset shift work. And if their mindset's not right or ready, we're finding that as a huge blocker to the innovation or the excitement and the culture and the joy that can happen from some of this change. A lot of district leaders are not recognizing the importance and the weight of some of that mindset shift and readiness. And they're really ready to drive right into the academic work or right into the content work or right into the digital ecosystem work. And so we end up having to take a couple steps back out of the gate for them to really understand how they're bringing people along, how they're getting people excited, how they're getting the buy-in, how they're communicating their vision for change and co-designing it with folks to get that mindset where it needs to be.
Okay, so guiding principles around leadership, culture, mindset change, instruction, professional learning, and community. Now, what would you say are the most important sequential activities?
So the sequential activities from our view is really being thoughtful about the steps that we have co-designed with the school system and thinking about what activities need to happen in order for there to be success. We roadmap in a pretty collaborative way. And so we take some of our grounding principles and then we take some of our stages and we map them with milestones alongside the district. And so that happens in a really collaborative way, but those sequential activities, documenting them and being thoughtful about what happened in those activities is really important to our change process, especially when we think about scale and bring folks along on what the sequential activities need to look like and be in their setting.
Do you find that the sequential activities vary from one client to another?
They do, yes. So based on readiness factors through some of the culture and trust building in some ways, where we're able to go a lot faster in some of the other areas around content or curriculum or instructional models. And in other places, we're having to build in sometimes 10x sequential activities just around culture and trust building and relationship building and setting the vision. And so we try to do that in a really customized way, specifically, for example, in some of our turnaround districts that need to do a lot more work up front. We're building some sequential activities that are a lot more scaffolded to move the district in an appropriate way based on what we're seeing and learning from the data that they need to work on. And in other districts where, leadership teams have been together for a decade plus, who've got a pretty strong vision and a strong culture, and they've already got some of the buy-in for the change, we're able to move pretty quickly through that culture and trust building and relationship building to the actual nuts and bolts of academic model or vision for learning.
So you co-designed the sequential activities with the district, as well as co-designing the new paradigm of education. Now, can you talk a little bit more about the most important kinds of continuous activities that you need to pay constant attention to throughout the transformation process?
Communicating where we're at, where are the milestones, where are the wins, where are the challenges and opportunities. I think the other one is the ongoing coaching and the professional learning throughout the process. And so being really intentional about what are the coaching opportunities, what are the feedback opportunities, and what is the accountability to more of those sequential activities day to day, and taking a look at where we've been. So communication, step back meetings to look at least monthly, if not quarterly, to look at the sequential activities and being thoughtful about where we're at, aligned to our milestones and to our continuous activities. And then being thoughtful about checkpoint management, where we said we would be in some of those step back meetings and reflection meetings. Those are some of them that are coming to mind right now.
How about motivation for change?
Motivation for change comes through a lot of our professional learning. So that's definitely a continuous activity where we're embedding the excitement, the celebration, and the incentives aligned to the wins built into our continuous professional learning cycles and all of our step back meetings.
And do you find that trust is something you need to continuously work on?
Yep. Trust comes a lot through our coaching model and our mentor model. And so any pilot team or any design team is paired with mentors and paired with coaches. So those mentors are coaching every single day. And we infuse a lot of our trust and our relationship building into that coaching and mentor model touch point. We believe that there's a lot of adversity that emerges from change management and a lot of adversity that's required to manage through a lot of that. And so we implement that. It's on a weekly basis for us, trust and relationship building in the change management process.
So communication, coaching, professional learning, retrospection, checkpoint management, motivation, and trust are the most important continuous activities. Now, turning to a different issue, what would you say is the largest school district that you've worked with in terms of number of high schools?
Yeah, I would say probably largest system that we worked with, number of high schools, 10 plus high schools.
Wow. Okay. In those large districts, did you just work with part of the district at first? Like one feeder system? That is one high school and all the schools that feed students into it. Or how else did you deal with it?
So we started definitely with pilots. And so we separated them out K-8 and 9-12. And so two different pathways into the convergence model, but being really thoughtful about allowing the high school model to develop and evolve and allowing the K-8 elementary middle school model to develop and evolve. We found that there was different ideation, still the same values and still the same approaches, but different ideation and scheduling and digital ecosystem, even within that district. We still had grounding principles that we co-designed with all grade levels and all content areas and all high school and all elementary coming together for portions, especially that setting the vision for learning and setting the vision for change. But once we got into some of the more unique sequential activities, we separated those out by either content area or grade level. And then we brought them back together, which was really powerful to see where folks had gone, because we wanted to make sure that 9-12 was feeling supportive of K-8 model and K-8 model was feeling supportive of 9-12 model for that feeder pattern to make sure that we were in service of each other.
So you had different pilots on the elementary and secondary levels that coordinated with each other. After a team redesigned their system, did you ever consider implementing it one grade level per year as the cohort moved up?
Yeah, so we do this in a customized way too, based on readiness. And so we've got some districts that are ready for whole scale adoption. They've got the buy-in, they've got the readiness, they're ready to pilot at different grade levels or content areas. And then we've got folks that are saying, let the freshman class or let the freshman educators or let the ninth grade educators run that pilot and we'll scale it into future years later. So we've done it both ways, by grade level and by content. And then we've also done pilots across a system where every grade level was participating, but in smaller ways. So there was a subgroup of 9th, subgroup of 10th, some group of 11th, some group of 12th. And by the way, we try to diversify across those different entry points to have different content. So let it be civics content or math content or literacy content, so that we were getting some diversity in the pilots by grade level. And that way, 12th grade educators weren't like, oh, we're not doing that because that was just a 9th grade vision for learning. The math 12th grade team got to see the literacy 12th grade team go hard on this awesome ideation where it made total sense for wanting to scale and getting the buy-in at that grade level. That's just an example. We've done it a couple of different ways based on content, grade level, and size.
So the bottom line is that you don't try to change everywhere at once. But then, do you find that when one group within the district is moving ahead, does that create a sense of competition between those changing and those not changing, where it becomes an adversarial relationship rather than those who haven't started yet viewing them as trailblazers?
Yeah, this is where, communication really comes into play, and communicating with the district and with all stakeholders about what we're up to and what we're doing and why we're doing it. We've run into some barriers where folks will be like, oh, they're getting a deeper investment at that school and they're able to be early adopters, or they're being trailblazers because they were picked the favorite. So we actually tell district leaders, yes, go find some of your early adopters and trailblazers, but find folks that are going to push back on you and really question what we're up to. Because if you can get them excited about this, you'll have a use case and a proof of concept for wanting to bring others along. And by the way, hopefully they'll become your biggest champions through this process. We have run into the fact where people are like, oh, of course that's happening there because of all the money that's been invested in that. And so we try to be intentional about where money or dollars are flowing to pilots or investments versus just strategies and professional development. And we've got a good percentage of success here where we call it the sideline effect at LEAP. And so we want people to get excited about what's happening in that classroom. We want people to see the data coming out of that classroom. We want people to see the student-teacher relationships in that classroom or at that area of the district, so that folks are kind of peeking in the classroom to be like, what's going on in there? I want access to that, or I want to be part of that. And building that excitement is something we focus on through our communication and our strategies for implementation.
Well, that sounds very effective at reducing opposition and increasing buy-in. Now, do you find it important to bring parents along in the process?
Yes, I've learned the hard way. This is some of the work that I led as a principal. We were so excited. We got educator input, we got feedback from our boards, we got stakeholder input from community members. We were elevating learner voice like we had never elevated learner voice before. Kids were excited. We redesigned classrooms, we recreated and restructured schedules, and we said to ourselves, oh my gosh, we forgot the families. And so it's the first week of school and the families are like, what happened to our classrooms? What's happening here? Why is there a new grading and reporting structure? And so it was the biggest bucket of cold water for me in my career to date of making sure that parents and families are brought along on this journey.
So it's not just communication, it's stakeholder involvement, perhaps even stakeholder ownership to some degree. Do you have pyramid groups? Or what mechanisms do you use to try to help more stakeholders be involved and evolve their thinking about education as you proceed?
So it's been really hard from a participation standpoint in many cases. And so we have our design team that helps us from a district transformation level launch a lot of this work and design it. We also have many expanded design teams. And so those expanded design teams can be at the campus level, they can be at the grade level, they can be at the content level, they can be at the department chair level. And so that we're trying to pyramid and scale down into those settings. In the same way, we're pushing into grade level meetings or professional development sessions versus pulling out subgroups from those. And so we are not doing something different in the transformation process by bringing you out into these settings. We're actually pushing into your instructional data and design meetings to talk about this transformation. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that over the past 2 years.
Scott, we're so impressed with the work you're doing. Paradigm change is so much more difficult than piecemeal reform. The outside expertise that you provide is essential for a school district to transform successfully and with the least pain possible. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Before we end this chapter, listen closely for a special offer. Listeners of this podcast receive 20% off Dr. Reigeluth's book, Vision and Action, with the exclusive code VA20 when you order directly from solutiontree.com. This offer is only available for a limited time. Visit solutiontree.com to order your copy today. We are deeply grateful to everyone supporting our GoFundMe campaign, including Fred O'Neill, Unak Beck, Sanem Aslan, and Ji-Yeon Lee. The campaign is called Help End America's Education Crisis Now, and the link is in the show notes. Your generous contributions make it possible for us to keep this podcast available to all. Thanks so much to our guests, Dr. Reigeluth, Jeff Wetzler from Transcend Education, and Scott Farnheim from Leap Innovations. That's it for Chapter 8 of The Education Crisis, What It Is and How to Fix It. I'm Tembi Duncan, and remember, the future of education is in our hands.